Hi, I'm Jake. In this video, we're going to be talking about the beehive and the individual parts that make it up. Then we'll go over the pros and cons of the two most common hives, the top bar hive and the Langstroth here. Let's start here with the Langstroth hive. The Langstroth hive was named after a man named Laurence Langstroth. In the mid-1800s, L.L. Langstroth had been keeping bees as most beekeepers had been keeping them for over thousands of years. Beekeeping consisted of catching a swarm of bees and containing them in some sort of cavity or container. Traditionally, most of us, when we think of beekeeping, we think of the straw skep. This is the hive that the Europeans kept for their bees in for many years. They would catch a swarm, they would place it in this basket, and then place the basket on some flat surface, leave the bees there all summer, and then towards the end of the summer, they would take the whole basket and either dunk it in hot water or put it over a fire. This would kill all the bees and all the brood. Then they would take the combs that the bees had built inside here, scrape them all out, squeeze the whole mixture together, and the liquid that came out was what they used for honey. This destroyed your hive every year, and therefore they had to collect a new swarm every spring. Beekeepers began to realize that in order to be more productive, they were going to have to be able to manage each individual comb. They were going to have to be able to take the combs out of the hive and separate the brood combs, where they're raising all their young, from the honeycombs. So many beekeepers began to work with the hive, building all sorts of apparatuses and frames in order to get the bees to build their combs on it. But the bees never did it. They just, one failure after the other, it just didn't work. Then in the 1850s, Langstroth made an incredible discovery. He realized that bees built their combs 1 3/8 from center to center every time, whether in a hive, in the wild, anywhere around, they always built their combs 1 3/8 apart. So then he built his frames, his apparatuses to hold the combs 1 3/8 from center to center. Now for the first time, bees began to accept the apparatuses the beekeepers made to build their combs on, and the beekeepers were able to manage their hives in such a way that they didn't have to kill the brood and bees and start a new colony every spring. L.L. Langstroth's hives were a combination of the two hives here. Both hives came out of what he first developed. He started off with a box hive with top bars going across the top and little wax starters on them. The bees began to build their combs from there, and later he built a frame to encapsulate that. As beekeeping became more and more industrialized, beekeepers began to focus more and more on honey production rather than just the bees and pollination. They began to build these box hives in order to stack up the boxes so that they could maximize their honey production. So from that drive for production came what we know as the modern Langstroth hive. Now let's go over the individual parts of the Langstroth hive here. We've got the lid. This is the most common lid. There's several different styles, but this is the most common. Then we've got the boxes themselves. If you notice here, there's two different size boxes. There's a 6.5-inch box here and then a 9-inch box. The reason for that is when harvesting honey, these boxes get very heavy. A deep box like this filled with honey is going to weigh 80 pounds, and this shallow box is going to weigh about 60 pounds. That really helps on the beekeeper's back. We raise our young bees. The brood is all raised in the deeper boxes. In the shallower boxes, we just save for the honey. Okay, now inside the hive, we've got the frame. And in the frame here, we've got something called foundation. There's several different foundations on the market. There's the wax ones, and then there's the plastic ones. The more common ones these days are the plastic ones. The purpose of foundation is two things. One, it shows the bees where to build their combs. You see it's embossed in the shape of their combs, so they just draw it out with wax. And then the second is to add rigidity to the comb when you put this whole comb in the extractor. Now the combs are built with that 1 3/8 spacing. The comb itself is 1 3/8, so that puts the center of the comb 1 3/8 from each comb. That was that discovery that Langstroth made. Now, in order to keep the queen down here rearing all her young and laying her eggs in the bottom box, we have a queen excluder. It's a wire grate, and the wires are all spaced apart so that the worker bees bringing in the honey and storing it in the hive can come up into the top box, but the queen can't. She's just a little bit bigger and she can't fit through this screen. So this is placed over what we call the brood box. That's just a box that's deeper, and where all the young is raised. We place that over there, and that keeps that queen down there in the bottom. Now, when beekeeping, as the hive expands, we'll have to add more boxes on. We'll end up with 2 deep boxes for brood. Then we'll put our queen excluder. Then we'll begin to stack these shallower boxes on top. I have seen hives stacked up as high as 8 shallow boxes on top of 2 brood boxes. That's a good honey year. Then the whole hive is set on what we call the bottom board. This here is the bottom board. This is a screened bottom board, and the purpose of it is 2 things. 1, it adds ventilation in our hot Texas summers, and 2, there's a little pest we have in our hives called a mite. It's kind of like a tick. It hosts itself on the bees, and every once in a while it falls off, and it'll fall right through that screen and land on this little white board down here, and it's unable to crawl back up and get on the bees. So that's your standard Langstroth hive. So now let's go over the individual parts of the top bar hive. This version of the top bar hive is my own development. I've been working with the top bar hive for the past 13 years here in Texas, and one of the things that we have to focus on is heat. So I changed some of the things from the standard top bar hive that you would see elsewhere. Okay, here is the roof. I've put some styrofoam in the roof to keep the heat from going down onto the hive itself. I also have put some little spacers here, and this keeps the lid about 3/4 of an inch above the hive, and that allows for ventilation and air to circulate over the top of the bars. And then in the hive, we've got our top bars. And again, here's that 1 3/8" spacing that L.L. Langstroth discovered back in the 1850s. The top bar here has this starter strip on it. It can be a wax starter strip or it can be a plastic. But all this does is it guides the bees where to build their combs. They will build their combs off the top bar hanging down like this. So the top bar hive has about 24 top bars in it. When you're first starting your hive, you'll only use about 10 of them. Here we have a divider board. This serves 2 purposes. 1, it condenses the amount of space that the bees have to warm in the wintertime, and then the bees have to cool their hive also, so it allows them to have the minimal amount of space that they have to heat up the hive or cool it. This also helps the bees build their combs straight. We'll keep it pretty close to where they're building their combs, and they'll build them straight across these bars. Okay, so as the hive grows, you'll move this divider board back. You'll always want to keep about 3 bars for the bees to build their combs on. They'll continue to expand, and you'll just continue to move this divider board back. In a good honey year, you'll end up moving this divider board all the way to the back here. You'll have combs on all 24 of these bars. Another thing about this particular top bar hive is I have put an entrance on both ends. Both ends of the hive look just like this end right here. We've got an entrance here, and then we've got an entrance here. The purpose of this is so that you can raise your own queens in the back part of the hive. You also can split the colony right within this hive. So you can have 2 colonies of bees right in this hive here. This helps cut back on the swarming problems. So that's the parts of the top bar hive. Now let's discuss the pros and cons of the 2 hives here. The Langstroth hive was developed for maximum honey production. For the small family homestead, the disadvantage is it takes a lot of tools to extract the honey. To harvest the honey, you'll take the comb out. First, the bees build their combs within the frame, and after they fill the combs with honey, they cap each cell with a wax capping. So then we have to take this comb out. we have to take a hot knife and cut that wax capping off. We'll take it and put it in a big round barrel extractor, and all the frames are put in there in the shape of a wagon wheel, and then they're spun, and centrifugal force pulls the honey out of the combs. In order to harvest the honey, we've got to harvest an entire box or more. It would be to our disadvantage just to harvest one comb, because when the honey is in the extractor, it'll just barely wet the sides before it begins to run out. So we need an entire box. The equipment is fairly expensive, and if I was going to be in beekeeping and have more than 10 hives, I probably would have the Langstroth hive. Now let's talk about the top bar hive here. The top bar hive, on the other hand, is great for somebody who's looking for pollination and to also harvest a little honey on the side. You can harvest one comb at a time. The way you harvest the honey is you'll take the combs out, and you'll take a knife and you just cut it right off below the starter strip. Take the comb and place it in a bowl. Take a potato masher and mash those combs up, and then you'll pour that mashing of comb and wax over cheesecloth stretched over a bucket. You'll get your wax on the top and you'll get your honey on the bottom. The nice thing about it is you can harvest one comb at a time. You can harvest 10 combs if you have it, but if you're out checking your bees and you notice there's a comb ready to be taken, you can take it. It doesn't take a lot of equipment, and you probably already have it in your kitchen. The disadvantage to the top bar hive is when you harvest your honey, you're taking the comb every time. So the bees have to rebuild that comb. On an average year, you should be able to get anywhere from 3 to 5 gallons out of this hive. The Langstroth hive, on the other hand, because you're returning the combs back to the hive, they spend all their energy just gathering nectar and turning it into honey. You can get anywhere from 3 to 7 gallons. So as you can see, the production is a lot higher. A lot more equipment, a lot more production, a lot less equipment, a little bit less honey. Because I'm focused on sustainability, I can raise all the bees I need for this hive right within this hive. Remember, it's got entrances on both ends, and so I can raise queens. I have a very simple method that I use in this top bar hive for raising queens. Now, if I was going to be keeping bees with the top bar hive, I probably wouldn't want to have a lot of them. If I had a small homestead, 2 top bar hives would be enough to pollinate my garden and to provide me with what I would need for my family. In beekeeping, if you're after production and you're wanting 10 or more hives, the Langstroth hive would be the way to go. As far as the small family homestead goes and sustainability, the top bar hive is great. 2 or 3 hives is just what you would need to provide your garden with pollination and your family with a little honey.